Today, I want to talk about something that will be this is a good segue from the previous presentation on getting BI jobs, because this can help in that regard, as well as helping people to be more influential and be able to persuade with our data. So what we're going to focus on is more the human side of data and how we can make that more effective. Some background about me: I am a business intelligence manager. I have a team of about 25 data warehouse, data analytic engineers that do everything from data modeling to ETL to writing reports and dashboards and doing data science and analysis on that. I'm also a speaker and corporate trainer, and in particular, one of my areas of emphasis is on body language. I'm a certified body language trainer to try to help people to present themselves better and to recognize emotional cues in other people so they can better understand what they're trying to communicate. And it's kind of a weird mixture between the two, being a data analytics guy, but also teaching people about body language. And this reflects an effort on my part to try to balance myself. And it also shows a somewhat reluctant path of discovery I've been on to show that data by itself, as important as it is only half the equation and isn't enough if we want to persuade and influence. How we present data and how we present ourselves matters if we really want to persuade and influence people. So what we're going to share today are some tips specifically with our nonverbal communication that can help with this. So I attended a Gartner conference early this year, and this is one of the statements they made that stood out to me. They pointed out that decision makers will follow their gut feel over the data if there's a contradiction between the two, 90% of the time. And the data guy in me, that kind of drives me crazy to think that they aren't listening directly to the data. But it's a reality that we're in. If we really want to persuade, then we don't want to get rid of the data, but we want to address the gut feel. How do we influence the gut feel? So I decided to do a social experiment with this at Utah Valley University. And to help me with this experiment, I recruited the data science team at Utah Valley University. And what I wanted to test was if we could change what should be an objective key performance indicator. And so what we decided to do is an experiment with cookies. And we set up 2 tables at the university, and we asked students as they were coming by to come taste the cookies and tell us which one tasted better. So in this experiment, our KPI would be the taste of the cookie, or more specifically, which cookie tasted better. And we told them that what we were doing was trying to decide which recipe we wanted to use. And so they had the choice of choosing table A as the better cookie or table B, or they could choose no preference. What they didn't know is that the cookies were exactly the same. We just got them from a local catering service, so there actually was no difference between the two. So one would expect, if we were purely going off of objective data, that all the participants would just choose that there was no preference between the cookies. The change that we did between the 2 tables was, at one table we did positive body language, and at the other table we did negative body language. And then we wanted to see if that social interaction and how we presented ourselves would change people's behavior and see if they'd choose one cookie or the other. So we did this experiment. We had about 200 participants, and so I might want to run it again and see if I can get a bigger sample size. But from the 200, the people that said there was no preference between the 2 cookies only made up 11%. Well, I would have, being a data guy, I would have expected that to be much, much larger, because there actually was no difference between the cookies. So I would have expected no preference. But most of the people said that one of the 2 tables tasted better. And we found that 61% of the people that chose between table A and B liked the cookie better that came from where we were doing positive body language. And in doing this experiment, there were some other variables that we found that I might try to account for next time we do it, but it seems like this is still a powerful influencer on how we interact with each other and the impact that has on people's behavior and their willingness to act. So what we're going to talk about today are 3 3 different tips that we used at the positive body language table that influenced how people perceive the cookie and can change how people perceive ourselves, whether we're trying to get a BI job or whether we're presenting findings from our analysis. And this is going to help people to see the product or service as better. And part of the reason this is going to be so powerful and so effective is because most of our communication that we do with each other is nonverbal. Facial expressions, tone of voice, body language. Depending on the study, it's anywhere from 60 to 93% of our communication is nonverbal. In a 30-minute conversation, 2 people can send over 800 nonverbal signals back and forth. So if you're in a 60-minute meeting, that's 800 nonverbal signals you're sending to somebody. You're showing facial expressions. You're sending messages with your posture, with your hand gestures. And are we, as we're sending those signals, are they the kinds of signals that we want to, that are going to get them to buy off on what you're trying to tell them? And they're sending 800 signals back that are all cues as to what they're feeling and what they're thinking. Lots of information that if we know how to tap into, we can leverage that and be more effective. And between the nonverbal side and the the nonverbal side tends to be more powerful. And to see this in action, if somebody's having a bad day and it's clear to you that they're having a bad day, but they tell you that everything's fine, then which are you going to believe? Are you going to believe what they're saying verbally, or do we tend to believe what we see in people's body language? And we do tend to believe what we see over what we hear as a general rule. Now, one other note with this before we get into the tips. We have an international audience here. And so is body language cultural? Is it part of the background that we come from and the country that we come from, or is it innate? And the answer is it's both. There are cultural emblems that you may have to adjust for depending on where you're at. But a large amount of body language and nonverbal communication is just part of who we are and how we're wired as human beings. And there's been several different research studies that show this. This is one in particular that was done to see how cultural or how innate our body language was. So in this study, they looked at athletes in the Paralympics. So this gave them an opportunity to look at people from all around the world, from all different backgrounds. And in particular, they were looking at blind athletes. These are people that were born blind, so they weren't able to grow up seeing what the right body language was. But what they found is that the blind athletes did pretty much the same kinds of gestures and expressions that anybody else did. When they were victorious or if they won, they tended to do some kind of body language like on the screen, where they did positive power body language, something that's expansive. They'd often raise their hands above their head and they'd have a big genuine smile on their face. This is something that everybody around the world does, or some variation of that. And if they lost, they'd do just the opposite. Their shoulders would roll forward and they'd go into more of a low power body position. So that hints that this is something that all of us do naturally as human beings, and to a large extent will be applicable wherever you go in the world. Here's a picture that illustrates this at a soccer game. This is a gesture that's so common in sports that it has a name. They call this the surrender cobra. And whether it's a soccer game, wherever this picture was taken, or my son here in the United States at the Pinewood Derby race, it's the same kinds of gestures no matter where you go, with some small adjustments for cultural emblems. So what we want to start thinking about is what kind of messages are we sending, and are they the kinds of messages that are going to maximize our influence? There was another study done by a psychology professor out of Princeton named Alex Todorov, and he showed pictures of people that were running for local political office and asked the people to guess who won the election. And so he didn't give them any other information. All they had to go off of was the picture. And he found that people were able to guess accurately who won the election about 70% of the time. Which again, as a data guy, drives me crazy. I would think that we're voting on our elected officials based off of experience and background and their principles. but their picture and what they're showing in their facial structure and in their nonverbal communication is a powerful influence on whether or not they get elected. And in particular, he found that what people need to see in their face is trust and competence. If they look trustworthy and competent, then they're more likely to get elected. And I found that balance of trust and competence is important in any of our important social interactions. If we can convey warmth, openness, and trust while still conveying confidence and competence, then that's going to put us in a sweet spot where we can have respect, where we can have charisma, and where we can be able to influence people the most. So what we're going to do with the tips today are in particular going to help boost your perception of warmth and openness and trust to try to build rapport with people so that you can have better interactions with them. So the very first tip we're going to start with is actually a cluster of 3 nonverbal cues that you can do when you first meet somebody. When we first meet someone, we'll quickly put them into one of a few categories. We'll, in our subconscious mind, we'll assign them as a friend when we first see them, or as a potential enemy or threat, or as a potential mate or partner, or the last category is just completely irrelevant, where somebody sees you and quickly forgets you and doesn't pay much attention. So if we want to get in that friend category when we first meet somebody, we can do this cluster of 3 cues. And the cluster starts with a quick eyebrow flash, which I don't have a video to show it, but it's where your eyebrows briefly and quickly just kind of shoot up your forehead. This is a nonverbal way of saying, hi, I see you, and it's a universal friend cue. When people see this, they'll subconsciously see that as a cue that you can trust me and that I'm your friend. And you can test this out if you're walking down the hall and you're seeing somebody. You can try a quick eyebrow flash and see if they return it to you. And if they do, then that's a good sign. And to show, again, how innate this can be, I was at an event where there was a baby in front of me, probably 6 to 8 months old. And she turned around and looked at me, so I tried an eyebrow flash along with the rest of this cluster. And she, even though she couldn't speak yet, she immediately responded to that, started smiling back and interacting. And so even at that young age, I had created a friend just through some simple nonverbal expressions. So it starts with the eyebrow flash. And then the second part of this cluster is a slight head tilt. You don't want to have too aggressive of a head tilt, but just a slight head tilt is a nonverbal way of showing that you're listening. And because it exposes vulnerable areas on your neck, it's a way to convey that you trust them so that they'll trust you back. So with the eyebrow flash and the head tilt, and here's an example of a head tilt at Gartner, actually, at the end of this person's presentation. When she asked if there was any questions, she physically opened with her arms and had a slight head tilt to show that she was listening. The third part of this cluster is to smile. Smiling is the ultimate friendship cue, but not just any smile. There's a fake smile, like we probably all do for family portraits, or there's a real smile. And those are from 2 different parts of your brain and have a very different effect on people that are looking at you. The way that you can tell the difference between a real smile and a fake smile is in the eyes. A real smile will engage muscles around the eyes, and you'll get those crinkles, little creases around the eyes. That's how you know if it's a real one. And they found that when people look at a fake smile like this one, that it's a good cue, it's a positive cue, but they don't necessarily feel any different from it. Whereas if they see a genuine smile, a real smile, they'll get a little bit of a mood boost just by looking at the smile. So that's tip number 1 when you first meet somebody, to communicate to them that you're a friend and that they can trust you. Eyebrow flash, slight head tilt, and a genuine smile. And if you're not really feeling it so that it's not a genuine smile, at least try to smile high so you get those creases around your eyes so it appears more genuine. Okay, tip number 2. Here's a question to ask yourself. What part of the body do we tend to notice first when we first meet somebody? And a more accurate way of explaining this might be, Our brain has a part of it whose job it is to keep us safe. It's called the amygdala. And the amygdala is always scanning the environment for danger and is going to react to any potential threat. And so maybe a better way of asking this question is, what part of the body does your brain notice first? And the answer to that is actually our hands. Our hands are trust indicators. When we can see somebody's hands, we trust them a little bit more. This is powerful enough that jurors will find you more sneaky and less trustworthy if you're on the stand and they can't see your hands. And so here's a gut check to see if that's true. This is a fellow colleague of mine that teaches body language as well. In these two pictures, he's kept most of the nonverbal cues the same. But in one picture, he's got his hands above the table and he's using them to explain something. So if we're focusing on our gut feeling, who do you trust more? Most people will tend to like and trust the one on the left more because they can see his hand. So then the next question with that, though, is what do I do with my hands? And we could probably spend an hour just on different hand gestures, on what they mean and how to leverage that. But rather than that, I want to give you just one hand gesture that you can try after this conference and see if that changes how you interact with people and how they perceive you. And so what that is by changing the orientation of your hand. They found that in groups of people, if you ask them to do something and you ask with your palm up, then most people, 84% on average, are going to agree to it and go along with it. If you ask the same group of people to do something, but you flip your hand so the palm's facing down, then it starts to feel like a command to them. It starts to feel like you're telling them what to do, so only half the people are going to comply. And then if you ask that same group of people what to do, but you're pointing your finger at them, then only 28% are going to go along with it. Most people are going to start resisting at that point. And this actually goes back to that amygdala as well that's scanning the environment for danger. The palms up is a non-threatening gesture that shows trust as well. And so that's likely why people are more likely to do what they're asked if you do that kind of a gesture. So think about what you tend to do, what kind of gestures you tend to do when you're talking to people. See if it changes based on who they are. If it's your boss or if it's somebody that reports to you, do you change it up? And do you notice that it changes depending on how you feel? If you start getting more angry or upset, that when your palm tends to come down and the finger starts to come out. So that's tip number 2 for you today, is to make sure your hands are visible as you're talking to people to build trust. Keep them out of pockets. If you're at a table, try to keep them on top of the table. Keep them out from behind your back. And people are going to trust you a little bit more in doing so. And then experiment with this, with palms up, keeping your palms up as you're talking to people and addressing them. And that's going to make them feel less threatened and like you a little bit more. Okay, tip number 3 is called mirroring. Mirroring is when we tend to do the same kinds of gestures and expressions as other people. And so like this picture with the Big Bang Theory cast, they're all crossing their legs for about the same. Their hands are doing similar things. They all have a slight head tilt and a smile. This is something that we naturally do when we're familiar with somebody, when we like somebody, when we're really close to them. We'll tend to mirror what they're doing. And so we can use this to show interest to other people and gauge interest. If somebody's mirroring us, that's a good sign. It means that we've established good rapport and that things are going well. And if we want to show that to other people, we can subtly mirror their body language. And they may not even realize it, but on a subconscious level, they're going to feel like they're on the same page as us. And they're going to feel that there's similarity between us. And that's going to make them like and trust you more as a result. But we tend to like people that are similar to us. And so if we're doing similar kinds of gestures and expressions, then that's going to make them feel good and feel like they're connected to you. So here's a couple of examples of people that just naturally are mirroring each other. There's another example. Now, a caveat with this, though, is that you don't want to mirror negative body language. If somebody's really angry or upset, and they're maybe folding their arms and they're making negative expressions on their face, then that doesn't help to mirror that back to them. But if it's neutral or it's positive body language, this can be great for building influence. Another experiment that was done to show this involved participants talking to a computer avatar of a person's head. And they did 2 rounds of this. One, as people are interacting with this avatar, there's actually somebody behind the scenes that's watching them on a camera and is using software that can match his facial expressions. So as the people are interacting with the avatar, he can control what the head is doing and what the facial expressions are. And in the first round, he intentionally did the opposite expressions and head movements and gestures as the participants. But in the second round, as he's watching them, he just does exactly the same thing that they do. So if they laugh, he laughs. If they smile, he smiles. If they bob their head around, he bobs his head around. And there's a huge difference between the 2 rounds in who the individuals liked and wanted to talk to and were drawn to. And a big part of that was because he was simply mirroring back what they were doing. And so as an action item you can do when you first meet somebody, you can start to mirror them subtly. And then partway through the conversation, if you change something in your posture or your gestures, see if they mirror it back. If they do, then you've established good rapport and things are going good. If they don't mirror it back yet, then you can go back to mirroring them for a while and do some of these other friendship cues that we've talked about. So that's tip number 3, mirror their body language. You can also do this in the speed of your voice. Some people talk fast, some people talk slow. You can match that cadence of how they speak. You can use similar words that they use. All of those are ways to mirror and build influence. So in summary, when you first meet somebody, you can do this cluster of friendship cues by doing an eyebrow flash, a slight head tilt, and a genuine smile. And that's going to help them feel like you're a friend. Make sure your hands are visible, and then also subtly mirror their body language, and they're going to subconsciously start to feel more connected to you and feel that you're a friend. All right, I think we have a few minutes for, well, I'm not sure if we have time for questions. I'll leave that up to Anoop. But if you have questions after this, feel free to reach out to me on social media, and I'm happy to respond.